Hello, fellow Rebel Capitals. Hope you're well. I am here with my good buddy, Robert Barnes, and my friend. We've got a lot to talk about.
No doubt about that.
Let's start off by what's in the news today. What I saw is Trump potentially reversing the pardons of Joe Biden. And initially, I'm like, I don't really like that because that seems a little too authoritarian. But then his explanation actually made quite a bit of sense. So I'm sure you've been following this. What's your view?
I think, at least historically, that when a president takes action, it's like how Congress passes or even how our Constitution passed. Essentially, the courts don't like to re-examine whether something was legitimately signed, legitimately authorized. They don't like to get into those internal procedures at all. Okay. So I think Biden's pardons are irreversible. And so I get what Trump is trying to do. I think it's smart politics. He's highlighting that nobody knows who actually approved many of the pardons at the end of Biden's term. People forget.
So just to be clear, Robert, just for the viewers who might not have followed this in the news, Trump is not saying, oh, I'm just basically king of the United States, and therefore I don't like these pardons that Biden did, and therefore even though they were legally executed, I'm just going to go ahead and reverse them just because I'm the dictator of the world. He's not saying that. What he's saying is I think he got asked in the media, and he's like, well, I don't know if they were legit. And he's like, if they were, who knows who signed those things? He goes, I don't think Biden signed them. And so, if it was someone else and if it was done under false pretense, then we should have the courts look at it and then maybe they would be reversed. So I think that's his argument, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. And courts won't reverse it. There were questions about whether the 16th Amendment ever passed, the income tax amendment, whether the legislatures that supposedly passed it actually passed it. You research it and you discover they really didn't.
Yeah.
But the Supreme Court wanted nothing to do with challenging that, because that meant challenging the 13th and 14th, the 15th Amendments, which were passed by legislatures, representing states that they really weren't representing. So I think that nothing will come of it. It's an embarrassment that America got to the point where we had a decrepit president who nobody knows who actually approved many of the bills over the last year of his presidency. Yeah, because there was, for those that don't know, there was an auto pen controlled by someone other than the president, automatically adding his signature to all kinds of things that we now know he literally couldn't have signed because he wasn't in the place it was supposedly signed.
Oh, so we know there was an auto pen because that was part of the story that I didn't mention. You might want to go over the details there.
Yeah. So what was happening is there's a lot of auto pens created these days. I mean, people that sign books, nobody's going to sit there and sign 5,000 books. So you have an auto pen that does it and all that. So that part of it's not all that novel. What is that what it came out is that Biden wasn't in control of his own signature. So other staffers within the White House were just approving auto signature, a bunch of things, including the pardons. And we now know that in certain cases where and when they said the pardon was signed, Biden literally wasn't there. So we know Biden didn't authorize it, didn't approve it. And so the question then became, well, what do you do about that when you have things signed? Now, normally, if this was business world, that's a bad grounds to challenge the contract. A whole bunch of home mortgages got challenged during the global financial crisis.
Yeah, I remember
because dubious signatures. About whether they were properly signed.
Wasn't it robo signatures?
They were doing robo signatures of things that required personal approval. And so in the real world, you would actually face consequence. Not in the political world, because the courts have made the decision they don't want to get into how the sausage is made. So they will never second guess whether Biden actually signed that or not.
Okay, so going back to, let's just dissect the pardons a little bit further before we move on to the next subject. Why were these so controversial?
The volume and then some of the people involved.
And wasn't it also that this is the first time in history that they had ever gone backward and for that they didn't have a specific law or infraction that they pardoned? They just did this blanket thing. Well, whatever comes up in the future between these dates, that's what was unique, wasn't it?
Yes. I mean, the only thing close to it is the Nixon pardon by Gerald Ford was very, very broad and intended to be as such. But as a general rule, it was more like a permanent granting of immunity than it really was a pardon of a specific alleged crime. And now the Kalshi.com, where you can bet on elections now in the United States and bet on political things. You can even bet on the weather if you want. So one of the bets that cashed big that I had put out was to bet that Biden would pardon his own family. If you knew anything about the Biden crime family, but I told people he'll wait right up until Inauguration Day because he wants them to have time to get all their crimes in, including what some of those crimes were. I know from a range of people that I represent, the Biden crime family was out saying for a certain amount of money they could guarantee you a pardon, for example. So
they were pardons in advance.
Yes, he was selling the pardons openly. I
wonder what Fauci paid him.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, I guarantee something. I mean, ask yourself, how does a guy with dementia get a prime gift? He's the first president I'm aware of to be immediately signed by the William Moore, one of the top Hollywood agencies. Right? It's like, what talent does Joe Biden have? Right? Acting, screenwriting. I mean, what? I mean, he's great at corruption. That's the only thing he's been good at his entire life. That and harassing little girls. But I mean, otherwise, there's nothing else, to him. And especially at this point in his career. And yet they give him they sign him up. What does that mean? That means a bunch of people have already priced in the bribe, right? And the way they do the bribe in American politics is they give you the movie deal, they give you the speaking deal, they give you the board deal, and they give you the book deals. I mean, ask yourself, when you're traveling through all these airports, why is Angela Merkel's book everywhere? It's like, who in America cares about Angela Merkel's book? She's stealing Viva's name, Freiheit, because it's freedom in German. I told Viva he should sue Merkel for copyright infringement. But why? Because it's bribery. It's just open bribery. It's the EU's allies paying off Merkel on the back end by buying a bunch of books, stacking them everywhere, even though nobody wants them, for $5 million, $10 million bucks. I mean, that's how I was telling somebody the other day, other than maybe John Kennedy. I mean, he got assassinated, so we don't know what would have happened at the end of his term. But the only president, maybe in American history, to end up poorer after being the presidency is Donald Trump. Everybody else gets rich, and especially in the more recent era. I mean, the Clintons go from 0 to 100 million plus, Obama 0 to 100 million plus. I mean, these people, ridiculous windfalls. I mean, fabulously rich oligarchs by access to power, which is generally the sign of a declining society. I told people he'd wait until the very end to pardon his family. I think that's the one pardon he did approve. Because he wanted to make sure they could sell all the other pardons right up until closing time.
Wow. It reminds me of when Beyonce, or wasn't it Beyonce, who was basically paid to endorse Kamala? And I think Eminem was in there, and they come out after the fact like, oh, no, this is fake news. This is just those alt-right wingers like Robert Barnes saying that we were paid. No, they paid my production company to do this, and this. They didn't pay me. This is completely insane. And it's just that same, of course, they're not going to do it directly. I mean, come on, who are we trying to kid here? But the indirect ways of getting money to these celebrities and to politicians, I mean, they get quite creative. I mean, they're good at it. Right. They're very, very good at it because they've had a lot of practice.
Exactly. I mean, that's what USAID is. I mean, it turned out all these people running over to Zelensky. They didn't. Ben Stiller didn't care about Zelensky. Sean Penn didn't care about Zelensky. Sean Penn, I think, was $2 million. Ben Stiller, I think, got $4 million. Credit to Ben Stiller for shaking down $4 million. Who really cares what Ben Stiller thinks about international politics? I always remember it's like the South Park guys. They're like Sean Penn going over talking about how he's going to end the Iraqi war. Yeah, that's just comedy. That's just funny. The amazing is all these guys were getting paid with U.S. taxpayer dollars that were being recycled into political campaigns and things like this. It's just insane. But yeah, Biden was just the ultimate example of what a corrupt, dying regime looks like. And that's what sort of the old American empire you saw reflected in what, I mean, you look at Trump. Trump's trying to pull back on an American empire, not be as involved overseas. He wants, more regions of influence. He wants to protect transportation, shipping lanes in places like Panama and Canada and Greenland and whatnot. But otherwise, he wants to pull back the footprint from Africa, from the Middle East, from Europe, especially, and to some degree from Asia. Sees China as an economic competitor, not a military threat. And that's why you're seeing a shift in that direction. But it's also representative of the fact the American empire is really dead. And the only people who don't know it are in D.C.
Yeah, right. I mean, just like the American media. I mean, it's on the exact same thing. I heard that a lot of the reporters at CNN or a lot of the journalists, quote unquote, are having to take a leave of absence due to work on their mental state, and they're having like these breakdowns and everything. And then another thing I wanted to talk to you about that I saw in the news today was the Democratic approval rating, I guess, is just in the toilet. I saw a chart on, I think it was maybe Zero Hedge, where it's like the you see these two lines that go in the complete opposite direction. The one that's going up is the negative approval rating, and the one that's going down is the positive approval rating for the Democratic Party.
I mean, the Democratic Party is hitting record lows, lowest very favorable rating in its history, lowest favorable rating in its history. Its original political base, which was the working class base of eastern Oklahoma up through Appalachia, all that is gone. That's now Trump's base. The Republican Party is very good at destroying its own brand, at damaging itself, at imploding over and over again. Like of all the people Trump has to worry about, Thomas Massie should not be his priority. Thomas Massie is a great libertarian populist guy who's just authentic and sincere. But fundamentally, the Democratic Party is imploding, but the Republican Party isn't yet taking full advantage because the sort of the populist, liberty-oriented wing of the Trump coalition is still not embraced by the institutional donor class and political class of the Republican Party. I'm hoping Trump continues to go that path. Not only what Kennedy's doing in the health department, Gabbard's doing over with the surveillance state, but Elon Musk floated the idea, and Trump has now talked to people at Mar-a-Lago this past weekend about it, making Ron Paul chairman of the Federal Reserve to replace that would be the greatest thing ever. But that by itself would make everything, all the craziness of the last decade, perfect. I was like, just make Ron Paul head of the Fed. That will be ideal. Just like watching Elon Musk, just take a couple of nerds and say, hey, nerds, figure out where all the money's going. And then they figure out that the money's going to places that was never supposed to be going.
Mm-hmm. What, on that note, what is your view on the Thomas Massie situation? And what is Thomas's argument and what's Trump's argument?
So from Trump's perspective, he's trying to cut deals to get what he can get through the budget because he's got tight majorities in the House and the Senate with a bunch of anti-Trumpers on the Republican side in both houses. So from his perspective, he just wants everybody to help him get the deal he pushed through done.
Yeah, right.
And Massie's not a deal cutter of that kind. Massie's a very principled congressman. He's been the best advocate for small farmers in the country. He's been the best advocate for liberty-oriented interest against the surveillance state in the country. He's the one who told Trump, don't do a massive spending spree during the pandemic. That was the last time he and Trump he does a great imitation of Trump, by the way. He was on Tucker Carlson and he nails Trump to a T. But he's from Covington, Kentucky. I represented some kids from Covington once, so know the town well. I think Thomas Massie, there's no chance of Massie losing the House. I think where Massie is going, he's likely the next U.S. senator from Kentucky, which would make Kentucky have Rand Paul and Thomas Massie as their senator. That'd be the best combination in history. Yeah. And so it may be the case that Trump's truly irritated that Massie is a constant sand on the budget issues. Because Massie's like, we got to fix this once and for all. We can't keep just postponing and postponing and postponing. And that annoys Trump because Trump's like, I just need to get a deal done for the next year. And then we'll deal with these other issues bigger, broader down the road. So I understand Trump's perspective, but I think he's wasting his time criticizing Massie. Massie's got a huge base. Before when Liz Cheney and Trump temporarily went after Massie won by almost 60 points in his primary election. So they're not taking out Massie. The libertarians love him. Populists love him. Small farmers love him. So he's got a nationwide base that's almost equal to Ron Paul's base, to give you an idea. And he's like Ron Paul. Ron Paul was always a nuisance to the institutional Republican Party because he wouldn't shut his mouth about stupid wars, wouldn't shut his mouth about needing to audit the Federal Reserve, wouldn't shut his mouth about you can't maintain a budget that's just debt for forever and assume no bad consequences will happen. And Massie turned out right about the pandemic. He said, you go on this massive spending spree, you're going to have inflation issues in the next couple of years. You can't just dump this amount of cash and liquidity into the economy and not think there won't be blowback. You can't just lock things down and assume the supply chains will normalize overnight.
Right.
He turned out to be right. Frankly, Trump was wrong on that. So on budget issues, I usually will side with Massey.
Yeah. So and to Massey's point, somewhere along the line, you've got to draw the line. And he I think he was talking to Ron Paul, and Ron Paul posted this on Twitter, where he's like, look, I've heard this story every single time the budget ceiling comes up, that the Republicans want me to sign, to extend the deficit, or to increase the budget, or to increase the spending or the debt. And because, well, we can't get leverage to the Democrats, or we have to do it this time because of this. And, but don't worry, next time we'll go ahead and stand our ground. Next time we'll stand our ground. And he's like, look, they say this every single time, and we never stand our ground. And the debt just goes higher and higher and higher and higher. So at a certain point, we've got to dig our heels in, and today's the day. And I mean,
exactly. I mean, like, one of the key points is, and it's one of my favorite points to use with even conservatives. It's like, at the end of the Biden administration, which country? I mean, we describe socialism as the government ownership of the means of production. We have a metric for that in GDP, not a perfect metric, but a metric.
Right.
And which country at the end of the Biden administration did the government have a greater share of GDP? The United States or Venezuela? It's the United States of America. And Massey's point is, that's not a sustainable economic path long term. And I agree with him on that.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, I think that really highlights the difference between a Ron Paul or Thomas Massey and a Donald Trump. And I'm not here to say Trump's way of doing things is good or bad. This is just to say, these are the two different worldviews. Like them or hate them, whatever side you fall on, it's up to you. But Trump is all about making deals. He really doesn't have a lot of principles. It's all about, hey, does this deal make sense? And if it makes sense for the United States, then let's go ahead and move forward. Where Massey and Ron Paul are like, they're not really deal makers. They're more principle guys.
Exactly.
And so
I would even call them idealist. That, Trump is a realist, they're idealist. But often the idealism we need if we're going to get to the place we realistically need to get to.
Yeah. I think that's the best way of looking at the two approaches. What about the New York Times on Sunday? My good buddy Chris Irons with QTR and Fringe Finance on Substack, he did a thing on Zero Hedge today, where I guess their headline, I don't know if you saw this, in the New York Times, is basically how we were lied to about the cerveza sickness. Did you see this?
Who knew? Yeah, it was like, I could have sworn it was the New York Times who was doing the lying.
Exactly.
Sure.
Exactly.
It was like the ultimate form of gaslighting. They're like, we're shocked to discover gambling's going on in here, to quote Casablanca. I mean, it was obvious from day one. I mean, we were screaming about it from the very get-go. I remember, we were out on a limb. I mean, talking about this in March and April of 2020. I mean,
I was getting my YouTube channel shut down for
completely. I mean, I remember I quit Pratt Law for about 8 weeks and went to Alex Jones at InfoWars and did a show just on the pandemic. I mean, we talked about several of the issues, but it felt like we were all alone. I remember Jones was the one who was telling me, "Hey, Barnes, it came from a lab. Definitely came from a lab. No doubt." And I was like, "How in the world do you possibly, know this without doubt?" And he gave me his whole explanation. And it turned out he was dead right. I mean, all of it. Whereas all the institutional media who said, that lockdowns would work, shutting down schools would be net
such
positive.
As the New York Times, by the way.
I know. They're admitting never should have done the lockdowns. Mask mandates never worked. Social distancing was made up.
But they didn't take responsibility, Robert. They said, "Oh, well, this is what we were told, and we were just reporting things that just turned out to be inaccurate." But nobody could have known what the facts were back then. That's basically their stance.
I know. It's like, I remember Chris Martinson going through this, all this stuff. We were going through, Ivor Rankin. We were, pointing out These tactics had never worked before. Social distancing had no scientific basis. No reason to believe there would be a successful COVID vaccine since there never had been. No reason to believe mRNA would be a successful vaccine when there had never been a successful mRNA vaccine. Pointed out that lockdowns didn't even work during the Spanish flu in the few places that they were tried. That these kind of masks didn't prevent these kind of airborne viruses. That staying indoors was probably the worst place to be for an airborne virus. Being outdoors,
benefit analysis without the age stratification.
No, exactly. All of it. I mean, remember we were breaking down boat, the diamond, whatever it was that was, Korean, Asian. We're like, okay, here's what the real risk ratio is. Here's the real portfolio. And we were called conspiracy theorists. We were censored. We were suppressed. Other people had legal actions and other actions taken against them. People lost their jobs and careers, including medical doctors who outed, hey, something's wrong. People who just said ivermectin probably works since it's worked for billions of people over about a century were completely demonized. Even Joe Rogan for simply taking it.
Yeah, the horse.
It was a horse dewormer.
Yeah. It really, when you think back on those times, it really pisses you off. And it's like the balls you have to have now as the New York Times to come out and not take any responsibility for that. It's just, the least you could do is apologize to all the people that you demonized that turned out to be correct during that time. And, it reminds me of that headline, and I'll never forget. It was in Forbes and right around the same time that said, doing your own research is dangerous. Remember that one?
Yes.
Trying to urge the general public, the average Joe and Jane, to not do their own research and just listen to Fauci, listen to experts, listen to the New York Times, when it turns out you should have done your own research. And if you would have done your own research, you would have been on the right side of history.
Exactly. And those that simply looked at the historical, medical, scientific data. It was all screaming that this was being misstated in terms of overstating the risks to people that were otherwise healthy in terms of COVID. And that these so-called mechanisms of dealing with it, shutting down the economy, locking people up, taking away. My favorite part is still the magical way the virus only spread like small town stores. It was a mom and pop shop. That's when the virus came. If it was Costco, it magically disappeared. If it was Walmart, it knew not to go in there. Like if it heard church hymns, it knew to rush right away. But if it was chanting BLM protest, magically it went away. It was the most absurd thing. It was like living through a live Milgram experiment. And it was like, how can this be possible? And yet we lived right through it.
That's a great way to put it. Or if you were sipping your Jack and Coke on an airplane, then the virus took a time out. But heaven forbid you were sleeping and your mask went just slightly below your nose, and then the virus is just going everywhere.
Exactly.
Here's the headline right here. This is from March 16th, 2025. We were badly misled about the event that changed our lives. And then Chris points out this meme, I guess, on Twitter where they changed it to something far more accurate, where it says, we badly misled you about the event that changed our lives.
Well, it reminds me of the old, when you want to get away from something, you give no authorship. Things happen. The things happen. Not I did something. No.
Right.
The things happen. We were misled by whom? We can't identify. Somebody else misled us. It wasn't we misleading you. No, that could never possibly happen. We're the New York Times. We're owned by a Mexican billionaire oligarch. Surely we've promoted every single war in the history of the United States, dating back to the Spanish-American War, based on lies. And it turned out, of course, they were lying once again. But it was probably the biggest lie ever. And the arrogance of people that had the credentials, the professional managerial class, the master's degrees, the PhDs, the JDs, the MDs, who just massively gaslit the entire world into believing this insanity. We only had one country almost in the world challenge it, like Sweden. Guess what now? Well, some of us said at the time, when all this is done, the countries that did the least amount of interventions, the least amount of lockdowns, the least amount of shutting things down will be the countries that end up with the lowest excess death rates. And that's exactly what happened.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, now let's move on to what is happening in... Let's do, I want to get your view on the whole cartel being labeled as terrorists, because when that first came out, I was like, boy, I don't really like that, because every single time the United States labels, terrorists, or they set up war on drugs or a war on terror, what that always inevitably leads to is a war on Americans' privacy. So what's your take on this? What would be the best approach? And what do you think about the idea? And then what do you think about the actual policies that have been implemented by the Trump administration so far?
So I think, I've never been a fan of designating people terrorist organizations or any of those laws, because you're right. They just short circuit our constitutional liberties. That's what they're there for. They're there to just flip right around it and not deal with it. I mean, like, for example, now, if he was the green card holder that is being subject to deportation, if he was only involved in protest, the fact that they're like, well, he supports Hamas and we designate Hamas a terrorist organization, so now we're going to circumvent civil rights and civil liberties. I mean, Harry Bridges, actually, green card holders do have constitutional liberties in the United States. Harry Bridges was accused of being a communist at the time, the biggest terror organization, according to the U.S., that we had to deal with in immigration context. And the Supreme Court said you couldn't deport him just for speech activities. So I've never been. It's like the drug war. I mean, I told people, it's like, even if you strongly oppose these drugs having access to U.S. markets and hate drug dealers and all the rest, I understand that. If you knew somebody who died tragically or dealt with addiction problems, et cetera. But I said, what they're going to do is they're going to use it to circumvent civil liberties. And they created precedents in the drug cases. They started applying to everybody else, like January 6 cases as it came around. Denial of bail, denial of rights to counsel, denial of rights for venue. So I've never been in favor of these short circuits.
And I was thinking the Patriot Act too. That was just a catastrophe.
Completely. So that's part one. Part two is I've just never supported the war on drugs, because I don't think it works. That's where there's a part of Trump who has said this in the past, who has acknowledged the drug war doesn't work, but he knows it's not politically tenable to say so. So instead, he embraced, we'll take them on. We'll be tough. We'll be, we're going to knock out the Mexican drug cartels, and we're going to so on and so forth. Even though you dig in, you don't have to watch many episodes of Narcos to know that there isn't a drug cartel in the Americas that hasn't benefited from significant support from U.S. intelligence operatives. We're picking winners and losers more than anybody in the drug world. Pablo isn't playing nice, so we shift to Medellin. The Medellin isn't reliable, so we shift to Sinaloa. Or Guadalajara. In fact, years ago, I was retained, not like formally, informally, by the old Chicago outfit guys, the guys that are portrayed in movies like Casino and so forth. They were feeling the pressure that they were going to get indicted in Chicago. And they knew some people who knew me who had, that I had alternative political theories about stuff. They're like, can you give us analysis of whether we're going to get indicted and why? And I laid out who were the corrupt actors in Illinois. And I said, it looks like they picked the Sinaloa drug cartels to replace you guys for other political reasons, whether it's smuggling, whether it's human smuggling, because they wanted to actually support human trafficking with illegal immigration in the U.S. to support, certain aspects of the economy and society and so forth, whether it's George Soros's political agenda of destabilization or big corporations needing some cheaper wages. And of course, that's ultimately what happened. The Sinaloa drug cartels did, in fact, replace the Chicago outfit after they took them out. And all that, the only thing worse than organized crime is disorganized crime, as a general rule. These cartels only. Now, I get Trump targeting the Venezuelan gangs, because those guys are a whole different animal. There's some evidence that the Venezuelan president Maduro's regime deliberately sent him into the U.S. as payback for sanctions on Venezuela. But the other component is, the way they gained power was just being more violent than everybody else, being more extreme than everybody else. It's like the drug cartel fights of the, about 15, 20 years ago, when they were sticking heads on stakes in Cancun and bodies were, draped off of bridges and things like that. So this Venezuelan gang is really unique. So I get where Trump sees that as a predatory incursion and is using the Alien Enemies Act. I think that is probably legitimate. I think labeling everybody a terrorist,
it might be legitimate, but is it effective on there's always trade-offs, right? But is it effective? That's what it reminds me Well, reminds me of the cerveza sickness when I first started talking about that on this channel. Reminds me of when Russia first invaded Ukraine, and the blowback that I was getting by all parties, all sides, was, well, George, we have to do something. We have to do something. And we got to sanctioning Russia. I'm like, that's a bad idea. Or, banning hockey players in the NHL just because they were born in Russia. I'm like, this is a bad idea. And they're like, well, we got to do something. I'm like, no, you don't. You got to do a cost benefit analysis. But if the costs outweigh the benefits or the perceived benefits, then you got to think of something else. And sometimes the only thing you can do is nothing, unless because if you move forward on the path of the trajectory that you're on right now, you're just going to be shooting yourself in the foot. So what's your view on that, and what policy would be effective?
I mean, I think focusing on the human trafficking aspect, I think will have a better chance of success than trying to control drug access. Now you can curb on the edges, like maybe you can reduce how much they use fentanyl, right? You can do things like that. But like, take for example the whole history of how the U.S. tried to do that with crack. They're like, okay, crack's uniquely damaging to a community, so we're going to have disproportionate penalties. What happened? It didn't work. It ended up leading to controversy. People got crazy sentences that were disproportionate. It didn't really reduce the amount of drug use and drug abuse that was taking place. I mean, we know that the only real way to resolve a problem of supply and demand is to reduce the demand of the drug trade. If you don't, the only countries that have succeeded, like sometimes Trump will say, look at countries that are really harsh on drug dealers. I'm like, but if you dig in deep, you can find countries that are really harsh that haven't been able to solve the problem at all. The only countries that have been able to be successful are totalitarian countries. And that's not a trade-off I'm willing to take. Yeah, right, I can guarantee you we can radically reduce the amount of illegal drug use in the United States if we become Cuba and have a massive surveillance state and security state all over the place.
Exactly.
Because, but I'm not willing to take that trade-off.
Yeah, that's I think my whole point. And at the end of the day, sure, there's some blame on, let's just say, the cartels that are bringing in the drugs, the supplier of the drugs, but you also have to look at the demand side of the equation and say, okay, if people weren't using fentanyl, then the cartels wouldn't be illegally bringing it in. And so I'm not saying it's all on the demand side. Yep. And then, you go back to prohibition and you're like, okay, well, it seemed to be the only or the best solution we had, looking at those trade-offs, was just to legalize it. And then that's pretty much going to take care of the cartels if you do it at a federal level. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think, Robert Kennedy has really been pursuing this. He himself battled drug addiction when he was young. And he went into some detailed conversations with some people on his various podcasts back when he was campaigning for the presidency. With people like from the Netherlands and other places that have in Portugal, other places that have experimented with some form of legalization, and he had proposed basically a carrot and stick approach to drug users, but he agreed that the focal point had to be on the user. That if you didn't reduce the demand, you just weren't going to reduce the supply, and often the more profitable you make the black market, the more dangerous you make that black market. And the more sociopaths you enrich. And do we want to do that?
Correct. Yeah. Yeah. And in fact, I would encourage the viewers to check out Bob Murphy's podcast on this, but it's well worth your time, guys, to check this out, because Bob, for like an hour, goes through this breakdown of the argument. And part of it is the profit margin. Because if you didn't have that profit margin, then if you look at the risk reward, it doesn't make sense to go out and murder people if you only had a 10% spread. He goes, that's why, the CEO of Walmart, as an example, isn't out there murdering people to, prevent them from going to Target, or he's not out there shooting up the CEO of Target, because, you reduce those margins and it kind of eliminates that just through market forces. And I want to give them it's the Human Action Podcast. And so check that out. It's maybe the last episode or the one prior to that to get Bob's breakdown. And he mentions pretty much the exact same things that you were referencing. So what do you think about the Epstein deal? Can you go over, I don't know, the gal that works for Trump. I forgot her name. But remember, she came out and said, oh, we're going to get all these files and it's going to be, we're going to reveal the truth about what's going on. And then finally the day comes and it's like, oh, well, we got the files, but everything is redacted.
Yeah.
And I promise you, I told them they better give it to us within 48 hours. So what was going on there and what has happened since then?
I think it reflects twofold. So Pam Bondi, the attorney general who took over after Matt Gaetz withdrew, Gaetz would have been much better in that position because he understands the depth of the corruption at the FBI and the Department of Justice. Pam Bondi, former attorney general of Florida, knows Trump because she defended him in various political and legal cases, including one of his impeachments. Is kind of naive. It was my take. She was kind of idealistic about how to deal with it. I've been trying to tell people around her, I was like, be ready for that. I mean, my view is still Gaetz is right that we were better off abolishing the FBI than trying to reform it. It's that. I mean, any institution founded by J. Edgar Hoover is not going to be civil liberties oriented, just realistically. So she got played by the FBI office in New York. Why James Comey's daughter, who's in charge of the P. Diddy case, was also in charge of the Epstein case. Why is she still employed? She's a political hack and corrupt. And for those that don't know the full background, Epstein fit a very unique role of someone who basically could enrich and empower himself for his various predilections and behaviors by running honey traps on behalf of intelligence agencies in the West. And he most likely got the idea from Ghislaine Maxwell, whose father, Robert Maxwell, who kind of died, mysteriously fell off a boat and drowned as in a unique manner when he was in some hot water politically. He himself, Maxwell, was neck deep in that. He managed to maneuver through all of the different intelligence operations throughout the Cold War. Epstein, Epstein was hired at the Dalton School by the father of Bill Barr, who was the headmaster at the Dalton School. So he was very politically connected, very politically protected. Bob Mueller, along with James Comey, is who gave him protection at the FBI. And this goes even further back. You can look up, Isaac Asimov's son, who was involved in creating all kinds of CP and other things that Mueller got his whole files and then let him walk without any problem. So this is an old routine of you get embarrassing materials on powerful people and you use these individuals to have that blackmail or extortion materials around the world. And it's not going to be a surprise to anybody that if you really dig in, now you're going to have a lot of fake names there. In other words, names that Epstein was trying to recruit that he was unsuccessful at recruiting. Like he tried to entrap Trump. Trump kicked him out of Mar-a-Lago after it was clear who Epstein was. That he tried to entrap Alan Dershowitz. I think the allegations against Dershowitz were not true. But the people he succeeded, British royal family, high-ranking political people, big money people in Wall Street and elsewhere, those are the names that they're trying to protect. And that the entire Epstein operation was really a cover-up operation. Seems to me like we're replicating that with P. Diddy. And so she got rolled. Kash Patel got rolled at the FBI by these corrupt rogue agents that are used to doing whatever they want. I mean, in some cases, you'd have the same FBI agent involved in every politically controversial decision the agency has made in a major case for like 6 years in a row. It's like, how does the same agent keep getting assigned like Russiagate, then somehow gets assigned the Biden case, then somehow gets assigned connected to the Epstein case? That tells you how political these cases were. Now, I think ultimately we will, because Trump is committed to those files getting disclosed, I think we ultimately will get them. If I was a betting man, I would bet on it. There's 2-to-1 odds. You can currently get free pick out there for on the Cauchy market that within the next 30 days, some more Epstein docs are revealed. But it shows the scale of the problem and the degree to which a lot of people around Trump are still not fully equipped to deal with it. I think Kennedy is equipped to deal with the corruption in our health departments because he was one of the few people to out COVID from day one. And I think Tulsi Gabbard is in a good position to out the corruption in the intelligence agencies because she's been proven true in Syria in just the last 2 weeks. It's not clear to me that Brooke Rollins is equipped to handle big food in America and how they've corrupted our industries. I don't think Pam Bondi has the political acumen and the full you need somebody who knows how to fight in the gutter. And right now he doesn't have that at the DOJ. And what you're dealing with is a lot of gutter level, very politically sophisticated bad faith actors in those agencies.
What do you think about, I want to go back to the media. I just remembered a question I was going to ask you. what do you think about Bezos, the Washington Post, and then just the complete 180 that he did the other day, coming out and saying that now all of a sudden he's going to be a proponent of free speech, individual liberty, and free market capitalism?
I think it's one of the most extraordinary. I try to explain to people in advance. I was like, if you want to understand the modern Democratic Party or the neoliberals, elites of the EU, it's best to study the fascist and the communist, because they're totalitarians at heart. And what was unique about them was their capacity to run off allies. I mean, Stalin famously had to whack them all, sooner or later. That's why, like, that famous photo of 1917, the Bolshevik Committee of St. Petersburg, and all but Stalin are dead within 10 years or whatever it was. But because their ability to take big tech from an ally, an ideological ally who was interested in, hey, we'll just hook everybody up to a matrix and we'll do UBI. The number one proponents of UBI were Zuckerberg at Facebook. They get Zuckerberg to spend $500 million to help steal the 2020 presidential election, in my opinion, by setting up facilitating mass mail-in voting and basically bribing election offices in swing states with the Zuckbucks, as they were called. How they managed to lose Elon Musk, who benefits from a lot of government contracts connected to the environmental movement, then lose Zuckerberg, then lose Bezos, lose David Sachs, lose the Winklevoss twins. You can connect it all to the war on, it's a credit to Satoshi. It's an indirect benefit of the Bitcoin revolution that it red-pilled a bunch of people in big tech, because a lot of these guys had their fingers in the big tech, in the crypto pie.
Like Andreessen. Mark Andreessen.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Mark Andreessen. Another example, right? And it was a bunch of these guys who would have stayed loyal Democrats, come from Democratic political constituencies and communities, aligned ideologically often with them. Two things happened. Part of it was COVID. Like, Elon Musk started getting radicalized, red-pilled with COVID.
Yeah.
He was like, this is scary. He goes, I don't know what's going on. But what stands out is, what are these people? They're people familiar with totalitarian governments. Right. That's why it was the Cuban refugees and the Venezuelan refugees. It was people like Pitbull. Right. Goes from being a big Democratic guy, musician guy, to all of a sudden he sees COVID and he's like, whoa, hold on a second. Because Cubans recognize totalitarianism when they say it.
Yeah.
And Elon Musk, same thing, started to recognize it. And the ability of the Democratic Party to turn those adversaries into allies is extraordinary. And the part of that's JD Vance. They're going to, Trump has embraced, politically was very savvy to embrace crypto, embrace Bitcoin, embrace the possibilities that provides. Now, I think if he's going to fulfill that, you've got to pardon or dismiss bogus charges like the ones against Roger Ver. I mean, you have a guy like Roger Ver, Bitcoin Jesus. I get he's controversial within the Bitcoin community because some of the Bitcoin maximalists, let's be honest, are just kind of in it for the money. They're not in it for what Satoshi was in it for. Whereas guys like Roger Ver were in it for the financial freedom capacity that Bitcoin wanted to offer. He puts out a book, Hijacking Bitcoin, saying, look, the intelligence agencies and the big central bankers are going to try to co-opt this. And within a month, he gets indicted. And he gets indicted on a novel legal theory about the exit tax, which is an unconstitutional tax in America anyway. A novel theory of Bitcoin, which nobody knew. The IRS had no idea what it was. Is it a computer algorithm? Is it money? Is it an asset? Is it a security? In 2014, when these issues arose for Ver, Ver leaves the country because he'd previously been prosecuted for buying fireworks. The guy served a year in federal prison for fireworks. It probably wasn't a coincidence that he was a high-profile critic at the time as a young libertarian of what happened in Waco and Ruby Ridge. So he had experienced the political weaponization of the system, realized the issue, and now he's being criminally prosecuted on a novel legal theory based on selective prosecution. Similarly situated people haven't been prosecuted. It's what I tell people, how to look for lawfare. Look for a novel legal theory, look for a selective prosecution, and look for government misconduct, because they're always lying, cheating, and stealing when they're doing this stuff. Right? McAfee might have made a few mistakes here and there. He definitely had some very interesting personal habits, that you wouldn't necessarily want to partake in. And I would recommend never killing McAfee's dogs, because then you might end up dead yourself. But the bottom line is, they weren't targeting him for any of those reasons. They were targeting him because he was a high-profile political dissident, raising questions about the way our financial and political centralized systems operate. And that's why he was targeted, ended up dead in Spain, where they have Roger Ver on extradition right now. And so if Trump is going to, could crypto open the door to an opportunity to get some of the tech, the tech bros realigned away from woke Democratic Party politics that was damaging their economy anyway. Diversity, equity, inclusion doesn't work when you want the best engineer, for example, for a lot of reasons. But he needs to fulfill that deliver because he wants to change the way Bitcoin is taxed. He wants to encourage Bitcoin and crypto investments in the United States. I mean, the whole Trump-Vance message is invest in America and we're going to make it as easy as possible from a regulatory and tax perspective. Well, you can't do that and be prosecuting the likes of Roger Ver that on completely bogus charges. So, hopefully he'll dismiss those charges against Roger Ver. But that's where there's still a gap between Trump and the everyday people administering the government. So, Brooke Jackson case against Pfizer, which is the big case exposing Pfizer committed fraud. They promised a safe, effective vaccine for the prevention of COVID-19. What they delivered was dangerous, ineffective, not even a vaccine that never prevented infection or transmission of COVID-19. That's a $2 billion fraud on the American taxpayer. That case is pending before the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals. Right now, the Justice Department is still taking the Biden administration's policy that they can't allow the suit to go forward because nothing bad can be said about vaccines. That was literally their phraseology. Not that we were wrong factually, not that we were wrong legally, just that nothing bad can be said about vaccines. Not Robert Kennedy, Secretary of Health and Human Services. Why in the world is the Justice Department still pursuing the Biden administration policy? Because the people at the line level, the people making those day-to-day decisions, are still opposed to the Trump administration. They're still part of the same corruption. Just like the FBI agents, they were like, we're not going to share those Epstein docs with you after all. And yet no consequences come of those people. So it shows the degree of hostile problems that Trump faces and what needs to happen going forward.
Yeah, and I try to figure out where are those people that are in the shadows pulling these strings, because it's not the low-level people. I think a lot of them are useful idiots, but most of the people in government at just that basic level, I mean, they're just there to get a paycheck and they don't want to be bothered. And, if someone tells them to do something, fine, I'll go ahead and do it. And then you get the people at the top now, like Tulsi and RFK, and obviously it's not coming from them. So it's someone it's some sort of middle layer that has been completely corrupted by the likes of, let's just say, the global elite and the Davos types and the Clinton Foundation and whatnot. Where is that middle layer? How did they get away with this?
Essentially because they've got away with it for so long is part one. Part two is they have a lot of blackmail and extortion material on certain political actors. So a lot of congressmen and senators don't say things when they should that are in a supervisory role. And then last but not least, they have their compadres in the judicial branch. There was a good book some years ago about how the professional managerial class helped ruin the world. That helped birth fascism and communism and neoliberal corporatism and crony capitalism and all of these things that have really diseased the economies and societies around the world. And their allies are the unelected. And they're people that have finagled their way up to that mid management, as you correctly identified. And they are very skilled at one thing, keeping their job and keeping the prerogatives that they care about in their job. And that's why I'll give Musk credit. My pitch and some of us on the sort of more populist or libertarian side had said, you just got to defund all these people. You got to take away all the money, all the cash, cut off the spigots, and 80% of your problem will be solved. The next 20%, fire as many as you can, or reassign them to the most miserable positions in the world. And you need to, and that's why they're fighting back so much with the courts. The courts are providing enough protection. The press is providing enough protection, and they've compromised the political class enough that our representatives and senators don't want to do things like impeach rogue judges. Don't want to do things like take away judicial power. In America, legally, Congress could take away federal judges' power in terms of jurisdiction and resources for every judge below the Supreme Court of the United States. They actually have plenary power under the Constitution. And yet they haven't exercised that in the better part of 2 centuries. You have to go back to the Judiciary Act of 1802 when Thomas Jefferson fixed the problems that the prior administration had left with political weaponized lawfare. And they impeached a Supreme Court Justice, Samuel Chase, in order to try to get something fixed. And that was able to fix it for the time being. We need similar institutional reforms. And I think part of the conservative normie world hasn't yet got around to the fact that these institutions are broken. I mean, the point that's always been made from whether you call it the libertarian, populist, or anarchistic perspective is that these institutions inevitably corrupt. And now we're seeing these corruption, its impact on our society, on our economy, on our ability to function as a government of constitutional liberty that we're supposed to be predicated upon. And the only real way probably to deal with it, get rid of the institutions altogether.
Yeah, they're starting to get the disinfectant of the sunlight being shown on it, but we're still not seeing the whole thing. We're only seeing maybe 1% or 5%, and I think it's that middle group. They're in it for the grift, and they want to keep the grift alive. And then they are influenced by, I think, the people and helped by the people who want the power, the Malthusians, the World Economic Forum. So these people are kind of the puppets, the willing puppets of the global elite, and they're willing because they're getting paid. So that's the grift I was talking about. But at a level that's even higher than them, the untouchable level, I think, would be that the Malthusian cult, which is what I call it, which is basically the Bill Gates, the Klaus Schwabs, the people at the EU.
Yeah. Oh, exactly. I mean, what you have is these corrupted, and what these mid-management level people have realized is the way to enrichment empowerment long term is to be allied with those groups.
Yeah, that's
right? And that's why they were using USAID as a democratic patronage machine. Right? They're handing out cash to study, like 95% of the foreign aid money spent under the Biden administration never left the Washington, D.C. area. And that tells you what scams they were running.
Yeah. And now it's the same thing with Trudeau. And I just heard that it probably won't come to fruition, but they're trying to apply to be a member of the EU. Like Canada or so.
Classic. I mean, I think we will. It's like the South Park episode. I guess we got to invade Canada and deport everybody back to Britain and Europe. That might be a problem.
Yeah, it's almost like all you have to do to see who the bad guys are is just look who has this insatiable support for Ukraine. And I'm not saying Ukraine's wrong. I'm not saying that they're in the wrong with this, that they're in the right. I'm not saying any of that. I'm just saying that for whatever reason, it seems like all the bad guys are gravitating to that position. And I think it would just go back to the grift and the power, because when you're sending hundreds of billions of dollars to Zelensky, even if Ukraine is in the right, and even if that's what we should be doing, the fact of the matter is, 20 cents on the dollar maybe is actually getting to the fight against Russia, and everything else is going to all of the grifters and the special groups and the political favors.
Absolutely. I mean, that's why, these Ukrainian generals show up in their Lambos in Monaco. It's like, I don't think that's the front line. I'm not sure, but usually their U.S. and Western deep state pals are right there with them at the Monaco. Beautiful casino there. But it tells you what's really happening with the money, and it is amazing that Zelensky thought he could coerce Trump, and that Europe and guys like the Daily Starmer and these kind of folks thought that they could, railroad or coerce Trump and Vance into continuing that war and that money pit, which is, whenever you think of the war, there's no question that they don't have the best interest of the Ukrainian people in mind.
Yeah.
Nor do they have the best interest of peace in mind. They're letting them die in massive numbers just to damage Russia, but mostly to enrich and empower themselves. The number one source of biolabs, human trafficking, all Ukraine.
But in the EU, or in that area, that zone of influence, if you will, it seems like now they're not even allowing the people that have a different view to even run for political office. And I'm referring to Romania. So what's your view on what's happening there?
I was struck by that after Vance goes over and says, if you want us to continue to protect you, Europe, you have to be more, you have to defend American values. And if you're going to be pro-censorship, and if you're going to interfere in elections, the way the EU, and he cited the Romanian prior example of what they had done after he won and they took him off the ballot, said, quit doing that. If you don't quit doing that, You can defend yourselves, Europe. And what do? They double down and take them out of the race because they want to build a big NATO base in Romania that if just in case Ukraine fails, they want Romania to be the big opposition to Russia. And you're not allowed to be an independent dissident. I mean, the Slovakian prime minister they attempted to assassinate him. They've tried to derail Orban again and again and again. They're trying to intervene in Serbia once again. And so what you're seeing is the EU is the example of what bureaucratic elite governance looks like. It's been a complete disaster by any objective metric, societally, politically, economically. They're deindustrializing Europe. I mean, I don't know why they think that makes sense long term, but it's really in large part the Brits, because the Brits still think that they have an empire through the U.S. and their involvement with the U.S. deep state, which goes way back. It's not a coincidence that MI6 was neck deep in Russiagate. That Christopher Steele was ex-British intelligence, and of course, where did his money come from? For a large part was laundered through the Hillary Clinton campaign, but the other part came from Ukraine. People always forget that part. It was the Ukrainian oligarch that helped fund a lot of that nonsense. So it's the Biden family was neck deep in Ukraine, and if you have doubts about the connection to Ukraine, go back to our topic right at the top of the hour. Pardons. When did he date his pardons? 2014. Yeah. Right around the time of a little coup in Ukraine.
Yeah, coincidental. Extremely coincidental. All right, Robert, how can people find out more about what you do, buddy?
Sure. So if you want the political bets and we have March Madness here in the States, so it's always a lot of fun. I used to win my pizza money as an 11-year-old betting the March Madness. That you can go to sportspicks.locals.com for all the legal content and other content. That's at vivabarneslaw.locals.com.
All right. And you will be at Rebel Capitalist Live.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, we'll be discussing freedom planning and all of those things, which always useful. I mean, going back to the other topic off the top of the hour, there was no better proof of the need for freedom planning than what all of us experienced worldwide during COVID.
Yeah, that's right. But you're always one of the most popular speakers and always there hanging out with the participants and the attendees, and the other.
It's a great fun, great crowd, great group.
Parties. Yeah. So
in fact, one of the guys from the collective was my local counsel in a crazy case in Seattle, where the judge instructed me at the end, there's one word you cannot mention in this American courtroom, Mr. Barnes. It's the Constitution.
They literally said that?
Yes, literally said that. Even though the law itself makes the Constitution a defense, they put him in. They said that reporting other people's crimes is itself a crime in Seattle. It's harassment. It's stalking. That's the degree. And legally, you have a defense under the law itself. It says constitutionally protected activity cannot be criminalized. And I just wanted that said to the jury. The judge said that won't be said to the jury. And in your closing argument, you can't mention the word Constitution. As the judge said, that has no place in my courtroom. Welcome to America.
Yeah, it's at the end of the day, you just can't make this stuff up, and it's getting even crazier, guys. So you got to get your tickets to Rebel Capitalist Live, rebelcapitalistlive.com at the very least, to get around people that are sane. And
yes, exactly. And have some contingency plans in case you feel the heat around the corner.
Yeah, that don't have the censorship and the mainstream media goggles on, I guess, for lack of a better way to describe it.
You want to plan for your freedom now, not when they're knocking on the door.
Yeah. Hey guys, I'd like to personally invite each and every one of you to attend this year's Rebel Capitalist Live. This is the incredible conference I put on annually that helps you build a bulletproof portfolio. It helps you increase your personal freedom and liberty, and also it helps you increase the size of your network. In other words, you get to meet a lot of like-minded individuals, fellow rebel capitalists. It's in Orlando, May 23rd through the 25th. Past speakers have included people like Robert Kiyosaki, Ron Paul, Peter Schiff, Mike Maloney, Lynn Alden, just to name a few. So to get your tickets ASAP and to find out who is speaking at this year's Rebel Capitalist Live, you can check it out at rebelcapitalistlive.com. And just a little quick insider information, if you get your tickets sooner than later, you can get a discount, because as we get closer and closer to the event, the tickets go up in price. So don't wait. Go to rebelcapitalistlive.com right now and get your tickets. And I will see you in Orlando, May 23rd through the 25th.